friends. It is Aunty B Positivity. I hope you are well. Welcome to our new format. This is my first video podcast. And today we're going to be talking about New Year, New Me on that body. And also Happy New Year, guys. It's 2023. This is going to be released on January 1st. And as you can see, there's another amazing person here. This is Annie, and she is my personal trainer extraordinaire. And I wouldn't do it justice, so I'm going to let her introduce herself to you guys.
Right. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here. So, as she said, my name is Annie. I am a strength and conditioning coach and personal trainer. I have been coaching people full-time professionally for 7 years and training people informally for a little bit longer than that. I live in Manhattan, Kansas. My alma mater, Kansas State University, is here. So I studied kines at K-State. And I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist. I spend a lot of time with my wife and our dogs in my spare time. So not just a meathead, but really mostly a full-time meathead.
And the dogs are cute. Okay. So is the wife, but definitely the dogs. Okay. So I kind of already asked my first question. This is also my first interview, so y'all be patient with me. But I know we talked about kind of your CV, right? Or your professional resume. But I think it was really moving to me. I met her through a friend on a trip for training. And I think it's been a year and a half.
Gosh.
I think May of 21, right? So yeah. So I think we're rocking a year and a half. Best investment ever, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. But I think what was really moving to me was kind of your own journey. And you don't have to give too many like personal details, but I kind of just wanted, to whatever degree you're comfortable with, talk about kind of your journey with training and how that has looked for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started lifting weights. I'll be 27 on January 6th. So I started lifting weights when I was 12, and I did online school for middle school and high school. And so I had a really kind of unconventional daily schedule where really I just had to get my schoolwork done within a window of time. So there wasn't like I didn't have to sit in a classroom, and got really interested in weightlifting at that age. And so kind of started collecting, books and articles and informational content from professionals in the field at a really early age, and just trained for fun, did powerlifting in middle school and high school. And then being from Manhattan, Kansas, I thought, I'd like to get out of the state. And so I was the manager of a coffee shop for a couple years. And from that, I saved some cash. I went through a program called WOOF to New Zealand, which is the World Organization of Organic Farming.
We're learning together, guys. I did not know this. Okay. That's dope.
I'm trying to keep this really
yeah.
So I got really invested in weightlifting at an early age. It became the thing that I love to do. I started training some friends, and then I went to New Zealand. And I was like, Dorothy's going to get out of Kansas.
Yeah.
Another country. And so while I was in New Zealand, to make an incredibly long story short, and just kind of a warning that I'll talk about some medical stuff here,
right,
for listeners that are medical sensitive, I had a tree fall on me at their Burning Man festival, and essentially had 6 open pelvic fractures and intestinal damage. My bladder exploded, etc. A bunch of organ damage, a bunch of bone damage, and wound up being hospitalized there for nearly 6 months. And they essentially were like, hey, the only reason that you were able to survive this accident, the only reason that we had enough bone to install 29 screws and 3 plates in, et cetera, was because you'd had a robust background in weightlifting, and in particular heavy weightlifting. And so they were essentially like, training saved your life. And so when I came back, after that window of time, I was 20 years old. So this was some time ago. And I had been kind of in this limbo phase of like taking time off between high school and college, was like toying around with this idea of, K-State has a really good kines program. I was also really interested in biochemistry. And so it's kind of like, what am I going to do? And I think after having my accident, and after them kind of affirming like, hey, weightlifting in this way saved your life, it just really became apparent that I did want to train people full time. And so I went to school for it. I met my wife that semester. She was a rower at K-State. She was involved in athletics. And that was something I think being invested in the kines program too, and meeting her and kind of, seeing how training can reach into these different fields, right? Where it's like athlete specific or rehabilitation specific and things like that. I think I just got more exposure to the training realm after that. And so, it just became really apparent that that's how I wanted to spend my time.
Perfect. I don't want to be daft here, but what was your major? Can you describe it for the people that don't know this long K word?
Kinesiology. So it's the study of human movement, but really it's like exercise science, sports science.
Okay. Yeah. Dumb it down for us over here. Okay. Super helpful. Okay. That's good. Either way, y'all know that I have a super highly qualified person here. And I think for me, the aspect, not that I'm glad that you were injured by the time I met you, you were, of course, heavily recovered. I think it just gives great perspective for someone training to say, like, yo, I know what it's like to like have limited mobility. I know what it's like to feel like you don't have control of your body. I know what it's like to not be the person you once were, right? Or the body you once had. But I'm deadlifting 200 right now anyway, with these things in my body. And for me, I was like, what can I say? I gotta get in there. I gotta make this happen. So I think it was really good to have a trainer that kind of knew that experience and could empathize, like, hey, if that hurts that way, let's not push today. So I'm getting ahead of myself now, but I do think that perspective, while probably super traumatic for you as your client, is very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. That's good to hear. And I think, something that I'll interface with having had a traumatic injury is that sometimes folks have a tendency to kind of be like, oh, well, like what I have is like not compared to like what you went through. And I think, it's like everybody's just going through stuff at their own pace, and what feels severe to someone or might be the hardest thing they've ever dealt with, like is also valid. And I think that, for me, it's just coming from a perspective of if I have somebody come in and they have pain, it's like, hey man, I know what it's like to have pain and it sucks. And I see you, and I'm here with you. And so, it's always a goal for me, I think, to be present with people too as they work through that stuff. And I hope that my experience makes people feel seen in that, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I see you as definitely felt, at least in my experience, that it's from a place of empathy. Okay, intro done, friends. And I think the kind of next question, right, is I'll answer it and you can answer it too. What do you think people mean when they say new year, new me? I think especially in the realm of like their body and like kind of physical presentation health. And I'll shoot first so you can think about it. You probably higher perspective than I do. But when I think about new year, new me, we're ending a year, right? So people are already kind of processing what already happened, what goals they did or did not reach, what like new life changes, right? Married, kids, surgery, grand things happen in a year. And at the end, I think we're like, this calendar's over. I am God now. I can make anything happen in this next year. I can set the highest goals, and I have even said this, right, in my past, like, I'm going to become my highest self this next year. I'm going to dominate this next year, which I don't think setting high goals is a bad thing. But I do think something in the air, right, at the end of the year, we start just making really grandiose plans that is somehow going to make you a different person. And we'll get into how I feel about that, but I don't think that's a great perspective to go into a new year. It's to just like leave yourself. So I think when people say new year, new me, they're talking about like a different mental perspective, a totally different like eating regimen. I mean, some people are like, I'm going to lose 100 pounds this year, which, while doable, is a really extreme goal. I'm going to go to the gym 5 times a week for the rest of the year. A year has 52 weeks in it. That's a long time and a really meaty goal. So I just think when people say new year, new me, they have really grandiose ideas of what they can change. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I would just echo everything that you said to some extent, right? I think an additional layer that maybe I see, because I have people come, it's like January is the time when people inquire about training and get new stuff. I think on an acute level, we tend to overestimate what we can do in a year, right? To like kind of echo your grandiosity statement. I think we also tend to underestimate what we can do in a day or in a week.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that sometimes this disconnect that we see, this kind of common refrain, right, with New Year's resolutions or kind of approaching these really big undertakings, is that we anticipate like this is going to happen in a year, but we don't maybe break it down into little pieces or really think about like, okay, well, what are the little, like what has to happen every day for that to happen at the end of the year, right?
Yes.
And so I think then when we're living our days, that there's an emotional disconnect between the way that we perceive time and the way that we experience and act within the container of time, which is like really more acute.
Fire statement, guys.
Thank you. And then, I think more broadly also, I think it's interesting. And I know that, as a trainer, somebody in the industry and with you as a client, right, like it's very topical for us to think about nutrition and training and stuff or performance stuff or whatever. But I also think it's interesting, right, because oftentimes New Year's resolutions are centered around like changing our body. And I do, I guess, wonder sometimes like, what if we were to make these things more about, rather than physical change, but more about an action change or a value set change? Like, these are the values that I want to live out in this upcoming year. And I think that the most sustainable, for clients like yourself that are really diligent and really it's like really good at showing up even when it's hard. I think that comes from not just a goal or just from something we imagine of ourselves, but it's a behavior that's reflected out of a value set.
Yeah.
And I think if we spent more time on those values and less time maybe on the outcomes, that maybe those New Year's resolutions could be more fruitful.
That's beautifully said. There's so much to unpack, but I'm gonna get ahead of myself. So we'll bring it back a little bit. I think we both kind of said it, right? We said the thought of New Year, New Me, and I think you also started talking about some perspective shifts, which are super important. I kind of want to end there. What, I guess, as like a trainer, what are some like negative connotations you think are like results of the New Year, New Me? And if a few that I thought of, and I'm sure again you can elaborate on these much more than I can. We're just like, as a person, I mean, I've been kind of pretty consistent with the gym, I think, for 2 years, on and off for like 8 years. There's the New Year, New Me gym rush, right? Okay. I deadlift on the second rack at the LA Fitness every, Tuesday, Thursday at this time. And all of a sudden, Jim, Bill, and Bob, okay, y'all are there. The first 2 weeks of January at my deadlift rack at the time I've been deadlifting all year. Yeah. So I think that there's some shame associated with that. I think also as a person that went to the gym later in life, I was like, you know what? It's okay. I'm glad that they're here. Like, I think that is a perspective that regular, I guess, more consistent people should have to people trying this New Year, New Me, because for somebody it works. For somebody, January 1st, they stick to it. Like, they make something, they stick to it. Yeah. We can just go back and forth. What are your thoughts on that one? Because I think I have a list, but you probably see that a lot too.
I think you hit on a couple things that are really important. And I think one, and I am going to be like the first, I think, to admit this. And now that I train at home, I don't those influxes or those changes as much. But I think that the temptation for all of us that are really consistent or that have been invested in this type of culture or behavior for a long time, there's the temptation to like be an asshole, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah. It's like, I'm here every week, all year on this deadlift platform. And then like these motherfuckers are coming in.
Okay.
They're ruining my training time.
Yeah.
And I think that we all have that pull to be like, oh, I'm frustrated. And I agree with you that I think turning towards this idea that like, yeah, for somebody it works, right? For somebody showed up to the gym on January 1st and found either a place of refuge from the rest of the stuff in their life that was difficult, right? I think that there's also this nuance here, which is that it's not just about weight loss or body composition change.
Yes.
For some of those people, they might find that at a time in their life that's really critical for them emotionally or behaviorally. And what does it say about me to be unkind to another person that's just like trying to have a good time, And so I think that leading with that kind of like heart-centered, like empathy-centered viewpoint towards those newcomers, even if, numerically we could be like, most of these people are going to leave. Like, I think that turning towards them and being as supportive and encouraging and loving as possible is like always the answer, right?
Yeah.
That said, I think that the other side of that is that for a lot of people, in excess of ambition without like this is why people, and I'm not trying to like sell myself, but this is why people like hire trainers, right? Or like,
period.
I'm not going to get in legal battles and then try and do it myself. I'm going to like hire a lawyer. Right. And so I think that we don't maybe always have the tools or the equipment to like do what we've set out to do. And then the problem with that is that it's hard on people's self-esteem because they start going or they're really consistent, and then they can't maintain that because they haven't been able to build a plan that works for them because they're just not equipped for it. And that's okay. But then they feel worse the next year. I think that's when you're like sitting at bed and it's like, okay, I should work out. And it's like, well, remember the last time you started and quit? Like, internalized with like negative self-talk sometimes about the New Year, New Me push. And so I think that is maybe the biggest harm that I see out of that. More than anything is that it can corrode people's belief in their self-efficacy long-term if not managed properly.
You better tell them. Let's go ahead and drop the mid plug right now. I live in Georgia. Annie lives in Kansas, as she said. And I think, for the duration, you've been like remote coaching and it's been amazing. And I'm not a person who couldn't watch YouTube video and go to the gym. Like I could figure it out. Like it would get done, right? I would go into the gym a year before I met you, but I didn't know what to do. After my, 20 minutes in there, I was like, I guess it's the treadmill. And I think the point of training is to have a plan made for you. Focus for you. So when you do go to the gym, I think for some people it's super intimidating. Like it's stressful. You don't know what to do. You have questions to ask. So I just kind of wanted to take a podcast break and talk about just like the benefits briefly of like having a trainer, even if you're a person who like gets after it. Cause like I'm a person who I'll go to the gym. I'm gonna get in the gym. I might not have a solid plan and I might I might eat Chick-fil-A 3 days that week, but I'm going to go to the gym. So I think just kind of a brief moment describing a benefit for someone who's like, oh, I don't need a trainer. I go to the gym, I show up. It's like, well, you might end up showing up for yourself in the way you need to be.
Yeah. And I think, so I muted myself there for a minute.
No, it's okay.
Yeah. And I think that the reason that as a professional, I'm such an advocate for bespoke training, right, where it is custom to the person, is that the world is not like, we just can't know everything all the time. And there are plenty of, I think, people like yourself, right, where it's like, I could watch YouTube, I could figure some stuff out. Like, you're already hardworking, you're already like intelligent enough and educated enough to like approach this thing. The problem is that like there's 24 hours in a day and we can only be an expert on so much stuff. And I think because we all grow up going to PE class and we all have like gone for a jog before, that there's an assumption with exercise that like, well, you have a body, just like, just move it, that it's like somehow less. I think more people feel empowered that they like know some certain amount of thing about it.
Yeah.
That's good, but also I think harmful, which is that just like, do you want to have the same 6 months of training every 6 months for the next 5 years? Or do you want to have like 5 years worth of progressive training?
Yes.
If that kind of makes sense. And so I think that there's a lot of people who haven't had any guidance that just kind of live out the same year of training over and over again without any progression. And while for general health, that might be, it's better than not exercising.
Right, for sure.
It can add a sense of frustration and futility for people that otherwise would, are really great at just showing up and being like, what do I have to do today? Okay, I'm going to do what's written for me and not think about it. Right.
Yeah. So. And for me, the price is worth the peace of mind. I mean, that's just kind of what it is. Okay. I think we talked about the negative connotation. Another thing I kind of just wanted to highlight, if you want to point this out, is we talk about like the gym and the gym rush, right? The new year, new me, new body, but also fad diets. People are pumping them out at the end of the year. Okay, yo, Nutrisystem, yo, Jenny Craig, join me, eat this for 60 days and you're going to lose 100 pounds. I kind of, from your perspective, wanted to get just kind of your perspective on that. I think me and you talked about it early on in training, and it's like, you literally said to me, you're like, I know how to make you lose weight, but I want to help you be healthy. And I was like, I want to swipe right there. So I think if you could give your perspective on that, because I think people think about training as a very like linear path of like, I need to meet this direct goal and I'm out. And I think you kind of have a more holistic approach to training. So I guess to break it down, what I've asked 25 times now is perspective on fad diets and then your holistic approach to training.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that's a really insightful question. So I think it's impossible to talk about body image and nutrition and like fad diets like being advertised to us without putting them in the context of like our broader culture, right? Which is that we live in, and I don't have like the solution or the alternative to all of these things, but for context, like we live in a society that functions on capitalism, which is as it is. We could talk a lot about that, but that's not the point.
Right. Another episode for later.
We're constantly being sold something. And the way that advertisement is sold to us, right, is through underlying cultural assumptions and ideals. And what those are that you're not good enough. If you were skinnier, your friends would like you more, or your family would love you more, or like what you know what I mean? Like I think it's like the point is that it cuts to our deepest insecurities. And so I think it's like, if you were just 20 pounds lighter, like then you'd be happy. And I think that advertising sells us on that concept, right? Which is not to say that there are absolutely appropriate contexts where a reduction in body fat is a thing that helps somebody's health, right? I'm not saying that weight loss is bad necessarily, but I think that for a lot of my clients, they'll come to me and be like, I want to lose weight. And it's like, well, why? And it's like, well, that's like, how does your blood work when you go to the doctor? Oh, well, it's good. How are your joints? Like, oh, well, they're good. And it's like, it's fine to want to lose weight for aesthetic reasons, but I think it's also kind of like what's being sold to you. And I think you also have to contextualize that, like, I think also if you look at the ads for fad diet stuff, they're tremendously gendered. I think that it's kind of impossible to talk about some of this stuff without also looking at the body that it's being sold to and like what are the projections that culture puts on that body. And so I think that there's a coach that made a statement that was basically like, everybody does these fad diets and these really severe extreme things. But like, if your dog needed to lose a little bit of weight, you just like give them healthier treats a little less often. You'd walk them a little more, and you just like make sure that you feed them a consistent amount. And I think that that's true with us, right? It's like, we just like get our steps in. We focus on getting stronger. We focus on food quality and on sensations of like listening, am I full? Am I not full? Am I adequately hydrated? And so that was a bit of a ramble, but just that the antithesis to fad diets is like connecting to our body rather than connecting to our culture, I think, right? It's like connecting to, am I hungry? Connecting to, am I, underslept? Am I, what am I feeling in this moment? And is that causing me to have a pull to eat for comfort or whatever it is? So I think that maybe would be this dividing line between, fad diets are extreme, and I think they're sold to us based on some really toxic kind of concepts. Yeah. Whereas, health oriented, weight loss or recomposition or weight maintenance, I think really comes from unplugging from culture and plugging into it to ourselves.
Beautifully said. I have no feedback, but the second half of that question was just kind of your, I guess, in whatever way you describe it, your holistic approach to coaching. I think it's not so much of this is what we're going to do for 2 months. I'm going to check your box and then you're going to be gone. Not that people could not do coaching for a limited period of time, but I think your perspective is different. And of course, I think healthier because you're my coach, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think my perspective on coaching is really coaching relationship matters. And so I think there has to be this foundation that you're working with somebody that you feel safe with and that you feel respected by. And then I think the coaching component comes in, which is like, I could say like, hey, eat this much for the rest of forever, but it's not put into the context of what's going on in your life. And so I think that this dynamic relational component of coaching comes in where we say like, okay, we've narrowed our funnel and been more aggressive about our approaches. You've lost some weight or whatever it is that your outcome goal is, right? But I think very specifically with fad diets, it's usually weight loss. Yeah. So if you've lost some weight, you're entering a phase where maybe let's see if we monitor less or we control less and see what that maintenance is like. And then there's times where it's like, hey man, I'm under a lot of stress. I think I need to just like be more rigid. And so then we re-strategize together. And I think that a lot of these really quick fix programs or these like really short-term coaching things, what they focus on is like, I'm going to sell a concept. You're going to do it, you're going to get the result. And then that's kind of like the end of the relationship. And there's not a focus on sustaining that weight loss. Right. So I think that we are also this time of year shown a bunch of like really impressive looking before and afters and whatever. Yeah. But then flooded, right? And it's like we're inundated with this information, but we don't see these follow-ups at 6 months, at a year, at 2 years. And so to me, it's kind of like, well, how do we make sure that you create systems and strategies that are really anti-fragile so that you can continue your goals or continue to maintain this progress that you've made in the middle of also living your life?
Period. And I think just from a client perspective of the holistic approach, I think we talk about this, my platform or whatever, but I be having sick parents. I am like a 6-month-old lawyer, woo woo, but also like just work is stressful. Yeah. Life can be stressful. And I think there are like, check-ins where I'm like, yeah, Annie, I'm not tracking this week. I just can't do it. Or, I need home workouts this week because that's just what I can manage like mentally. I think we'll end on that, but be thinking about like kind of the parallel of physical and mental health, because that's a huge kind of overlap. But before we get there, I kind of want to put these questions together. When is the best time to start? If not new year, new me, then, when is the best time to start? There's so many things. I have so many grand ideas, but we're getting into so many other things. But anyway, what's a good time to start? And what is a healthy goal look like? Because I think a lot of people are like, I'm going to go to the gym every day. I'm going to lose 100 pounds. So when do you start and what does healthy goal setting look like?
So I think a couple things is one, I'm going to say the best time to start is when you are, think mentally and emotionally prepared for something that might feel disappointing while you're doing it. Right. And I think that oftentimes when people start, there's a fervor there, right? It's like to divest of our old selves. Yeah. It's like, I'm new year, new me. I am all of a sudden, I have 12 more hours in a day. Yes. I have 8 more hours of wakefulness. Like almost godlike.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
And it's like, well, me now is capable of going for a walk 30 minutes a day. And I think that it's kind of like we have to unplug from that like fantasy a little bit. And be like, well, what's happening right now? And I also think that starting small and starting right now is better than waiting until you can start big and doing it later. It's like, to me, I think, the biggest driver of progress is the small execution small things executed well, cumulatively over time. And so I think just the best place to start is like right now, but with whatever bite-sized chunk you can, rather than kind of imagining that you're going to start 8 things all at once. And to kind of piggyback, I think, on something that you said also, you were like, people are like, I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week. Like, I'm going to do this. And I think that, very similarly, I really encourage people to start with the smallest effective dose. It's almost like medication, right? Like, you start with the smallest effective dose, you minimize side effects and you maximize benefit. And so side effects in this case being like burnout, emotional things, where if we set out to go 7 days a week, nobody can do that. You wind up failing. And then you tell yourself a narrative about failure. And then you don't go any days of the week. And I'd rather somebody say, I'm going to go 1 day a week for a year and do that than start out at 7 days a week and go for 2 months. And so I think that starting really small, very realistically, while it doesn't feel as exciting and it doesn't feel like it gets us there faster, really does, I think, ultimately get you there.
Okay. I think you answered both my questions. Something I was thinking about just from my like training experience is I think that, like I said, I started out with saying like goals are super grandiose and that's overwhelming. You can have a big goal whenever you want to start it. That's fine. I think like I have a lot of like weightlifting goals. I like want to do a 15-minute mile next year. Like I am setting new goals for myself for the next year, and that's fine. But I don't think we've ever really had a calendar for this, but really I feel like whenever you and I decide to change my set of training or whatever, right? My 6-week or 8-week set. You're like, well, what are your goals? Like, what do you want to do in this next like set? And you kind of cater my training to that. Even if you guys don't decide to like get a trainer or whatever, I think having bite-sized goals is so helpful, because like cutting off 30 seconds off of a mile is much better than cutting off the 5 that I want to, or deadlifting 10 more pounds in 6 weeks is way easier than deadlifting 100 more pounds. So I think, what are your thoughts on just having like baby goals, you know what I'm saying? Little signposts on your way to your overall goal.
Yeah, 100%. I think we can break it down even further into this idea of like outcome-based goals and process-based goals. Okay. So I think for a lot of us, we focus on outcome-based goals. It's like, right, like big outcome, I want to add 100 pounds to my deadlift or whatever. I don't know,
Yeah. But yeah.
Really imaginary number.
Yeah.
I want to do X, Y, or Z, or like I want to run a 10-minute mile. And then we just like kind of beat our heads against the wall. And then when it doesn't feel like it's happening fast enough, we get frustrated. And I think, like you said, right, recognizing like, hey, I peeled 30 seconds off my time.
Yeah.
That's awesome and worth celebrating, right? So I think each little piece of that cumulative outcome is worth celebrating and worth identifying. And also having procedural goals, because ultimately sometimes outcome goals get T-boned by life. It's like I had just driving along, just having a bad time.
Right, honestly.
And, I think for me, it's like so 2019, to give maybe a personal anecdote, 2019, I graduated my kinesiology degree and I started Unbreakable. I started training people from my home. I started training people remotely more. I'd been working at local gyms prior to that and at the university gym. And so I was like, I'm starting my life. I'm super stoked. It's 2019. Yeah. I had my tree accident back in 2016. So I was like, I'm all drilled back together, like doing good. Yeah. And that November, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I started having a pinch in my hip, and it turned out that some of my hardware had a complication that was latent. And I had a MRSA infection. I developed septic arthritis in my left hip that ultimately destroyed the joint. And so, it's like I had these great plans. It was like, I'm starting my business, I'm starting my life, like I'm getting married, and things were going really well. And then I was in the hospital for, several weeks, and non-weight bearing on my leg. And my leg was bone on bone for 2 years. I couldn't do normal lower body stuff for a really long time before my total hip replacement last year. And then I think, like we all experienced, right, the pandemic. And so a lot of outcome goals for the whole world were changed, but there's still process goals, right? Which is that, like, I can still show up for myself every day. Like, even when my leg didn't work, I still showed up to train. It was like, hey, I've got a right leg and I've got two arms and the rest of me. And so I can still show up to train, even though my outcome goals on some of my lifts were, really eliminated for that year. And so I think that also gives you, when you have both, it creates, again, like an anti-fragile system, which is like, hey, this thing was lost. This thing is still good, and I'm still going to drive at this thing.
Yeah, that's money. That's money. Okay. I'm sure we've kind of gotten to this in talking about the goals, but do you just have like a thought on how people can stick to their goals. Because I think a big thing about the New Year, New Me is also you killed it for 5 weeks. You were at the gym, you were tracking, you stopped drinking all them drinks you were drinking at night. And then it's halfway in the year and you're like, fuck it. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired. I'm not getting the results I want. Like, how does someone kind of just get that grit for the consistency? Because I mean, I can say I have gained, lost, regained, and lost probably 30 to 40 pounds at the time of like our training due to like my own life, due to getting muscle, due to stress, eating and all that. And I think most people would be like, I'm out. I'm not doing this anymore. But I think had I just been focused about this number, then I would have stopped. So I think, what are your thoughts on just sticking to whatever goals you set?
Well, I think that, first of all, like you said, like you may have quit by now, but you haven't. And the consequences that you are much stronger than you were when we started training.
Oh, yeah.
Like things like weight can ebb and flow, due to really stressful stuff, right? It's like becoming a lawyer, like all of this stuff.
Yeah. So
that certain things are more malleable, but ultimately the daily practice of going, I'm sure has been, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, right? good for your mental and emotional well-being.
Oh my God. Period. Yes.
And so I think this is where kind of like our last question, right? Having multiple things that we recognize as success.
That's great.
I think our brains as people, we tend to bias our attention on what's negative. And I think that makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint, right? It's like it's more important to my brain to notice the one saber-toothed tiger that's going to like chase after me than it is for me to remember where like berries and water were.
Yeah.
Because that's a more immediate threat. But I think we tend to bias the negative in what we pay attention to. And so I think paying attention to the good stuff, right? Which is that, hey, this was good for my mental and emotional well-being. Hey, I used to have a hard time carrying all my groceries up the stairs, but I don't anymore. Hey, I used to have knee pain after I'd do this activity, and now I don't.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of ways we can quantify progress and that we can pay attention to the value. And then I think in terms of, creating and maintaining that change outside of, what we give our attention to and what we choose to give our attention to is really our value set and what we believe about ourselves, the narrative that we tell ourselves, right? And I think that for those moments, I don't know what goes through your head when you're feeling like maybe
I'm doing them dips. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like you are somebody that goes to the gym.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, I think that no matter what we do or whether we're conscious of it, we have a narrative, we have an inner story about ourselves that we tell to ourselves. And I think it's critical that story is really important. And so I think that that's really the most important thing to creating and maintaining progress, right? Is that like some things will ebb and flow. Weight loss may come and go. Life situations may change. Your body will change. That's
for sure.
That's a promise, is that our bodies change.
Yeah.
But that when it's like, hey, this is something that I choose to do for me. It's in my value set because it's good for me. It's in my value set because it makes me a kinder person. It's in my value set because X, Y, or Z. Then I think people maintain that progress more. And I think that some of those reasons can feel, maybe it feels corny or whatever. But for me, it's like when I train consistently, I'm a better wife. I'm a better coach because I know what it's like to do what I'm asking my clients to do.
Yeah.
I have a coach because it's important to be, I think, to have somebody who will be a mentor to you, right? That we all have that. And so it's like, hey, I think that training is something difficult that I have to do every day. That while the training part, as somebody who's into exercise science and performance, like I think all of that's cool, but even cooler is I think the person that it helps you become in the rest of your life. And so I think that's really the key to creating a sustainable practice is when you believe that narrative. That was a really long answer.
No, that's money. But they getting all of that. I'm not cutting a second of that. That was beautifully said. Okay. One thing I just wanted to make sure we kind of talked about, which I appreciate has been kind of weaved through all of our questions, is I'll answer first. You can have time to think about it, but just kind of the overlap of mental health and physical health. I think there's so often, okay, so that's the question, but I'll answer it. And I think for me, the reason I even started training, I met you at a really difficult time. I was my last year of law school. I had just gone through a breakup and I had lost, I think 30 or 40 pounds and not in any healthy way. I basically just stopped eating because I was just super depressed and stressed out, to be candid. And I was like, man, this is not good. I was appreciative and got a lot of affirmations from other people oh my God, you look so good. You're losing so much weight. But for me, that was just a mental fuck because it was so starving myself is good. Society rewards me for starving myself. Society rewards me for this. And I was like, this is so unhealthy. But I did going to the gym. I did the idea of getting stronger. And then I I guess, had a mutual friend with you, like a family friend of mine. And she was like, well, I have this trainer. She's super dope. She's just amazing, queer, affirmative, like just everything I needed at the time, right? Of like a trainer. And I met you at your gym, I guess, at your other house, I think now. And it was just an amazing session. And at no point you were like, oh yeah, your size is the problem. Like, I think you should lose weight. Like, there was no judgment of like, this is a goal that you should have. And when I was like, oh yeah, I lost weight because I truly wasn't eating. And you're like, man, I'm so sorry. That sucks. I mean, like, we can help you get strong, but you know, nutrition matters too. And I was like, somebody who said I should eat. And I will say, just like as a plus size person, this space is really important because we could go on for hours of like how many doctors and gynecologists and dentists are just like, well, you should stop eating that and maybe you'll have a better life. If you fix this box, then you're going to have a better life. If you lose 100 pounds, you're going to have a better life. And I am probably 10 pounds really heavier than the last time I saw you. So I kept a good amount of it off. I have never been more mentally healthy than I am today, right now, with training. And I track my food. I have somehow maintained weighing myself every day, but I'm just not fixated on this number. So that's kind of my personal narrative. Like, it did help my mental health to train and to go into the gym, and we set healthy goals. And I was like, I want to lift this much. I want to get a tighter butt. I want to get my protein up. And checking those boxes for me was like, yeah, I killed it. This year I did 3 5Ks and I had never done like longer than a mile in my life. Right. So it's so amazing. And I just wouldn't have thought I could do it, right, without people like you in my life saying like, yeah, man, do that. Like, get that done. So yeah. I kind of just want to give that, I guess, closing example of like your mental health so heavily entwines with your body. And we talk about being a healthy person. It starts up here, like believing you can go to the gym, believing you can train, but then also like, listen, go to therapy if you got to, set boundaries if you have to, block out the hour or 30 minutes to go to the gym, the 2 hours on Sunday to meal prep, because I'm just such a holistically more healthy person because of that. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I think, gosh, I've got a bit of a story.
No, it's okay. There's so much. Give it all. Give it all.
I think something, and I'm going to mention this in reference to the last question and then tie it into this one.
Yeah.
So I think it's in the book of 5 Rings or in The Art of War, but there's a quote by Musashi where he says, like, basically be careful what you say to yourself because your inner warrior hears it and believes it. And I think that kind of goes back to the last question, right, about values and our internal narrative and our kind of concept of ourselves with regards to adherence to some of these behaviors. But I think, like you said, in terms of the mental well-being approach, you know, something that I become keenly aware of as a coach is that I wind up learning a lot about people's well-being and about how they operate and about how they feel about and experience the world just based on them coming in for sessions, right? A lot of people treat training as this almost, you know, I think I'm not a mental health professional, right? But people self-disclose.
Basically.
You know, I think when people work out, it's like part of that physical release is paired, I think, with mental and emotional release.
Yeah.
Amelia and Emily Nagoski authored a book called Burnout. They're twin sisters. One is like a sex therapist and one is a sex educator. And then one is a conductor of an orchestra. So really, really different people. But they have this book called Burnout and they talk about this concept of completing the stress cycle. And so like, you know, how many people do you know during, I think, the pandemic and post-pandemic in particular that were just like, I'm so burnt out, I'm quitting my job, like I'm exhausted, like people in the whole world, right? Everybody.
Yeah.
The breaking point. And I will caveat this with that this book was kind of aimed towards women, but I think that anybody could glean, like in particular, this component piece of it, which is that, you know, something that causes burnout, right? It's mental and emotional, but it's also physical. I think we've all had a time where it's like, I'm really stressed and I'm like not sleeping well and I'm like not being very nice to my family because I'm frustrated and I'm not being very nice to myself. And also I'm like getting sick. And so that like evolutionarily exercise completes the stress cycle. And so, you know, in this kind of interplay between mental and emotional health, right? Like 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, the human body experienced a threat and it was like, I have to fight, flight or freeze, and you get like adrenaline and cortisol and like all of these things that get like talked about as though they're bad, that get they're for a purpose, right? It's like, hey, I'm gonna run away from a bear, I'm gonna run away from this soldier or whatever, I'm gonna fight, and then we like do the thing and we feel better, and that the modern world doesn't permit us that, right? It's just like, I'm in a meeting and my body feels like it's being chased by a bear, but I like can't do anything.
Yes.
All of that, those things add up to be really bad for our mental well-being. And that the gym, I think, is a great place for us to kind of tap back into that like physical release that comes with that. And then it's like, your narrative about yourself changes, right? It's like, I feel good. I did this thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I went to the gym. I modeled healthy behavior for my future self. I modeled healthy behavior for my family. You know, it's like we can kind of then tie this like narrative. So there's a real physiologic underpinning to why it's so good for our mental and emotional well-being too, which I think is pretty cool. But undoubtedly, I think that's something that I just see with clients over and over again. And like you said, you mentioned that like when you were having a really hard time, right? You lost weight and other people made comments about it.
Yes.
And I think that this is a bit of a separate but companion thing, which is that you get feedback from the world on how you look all the time, and it's horrible. And that's
all the time.
You know, when we see a stranger and we're like, "You've lost weight. You look great." I don't think that we realize like the harm that we can be causing, because you don't know how somebody's doing. And similarly, it's like I lost weight when I was sick with the MRSA infection and had people comment on it like, "Oh, have you lost weight?" And it's like, yeah, because I have a murderous bacteria that's like eating my body alive. Yeah, I've lost weight. But like, yeah. And so I think that our immediate cultural value that like weight loss equals healthier is so disjointed. And I think on the other side of the coin, as somebody in the industry, you know, and I don't know how much of this content on social media and online you get exposed to, but
flooded once again, I'm sure.
Yeah, flooded, right? And it's like there's 1,001 moments on Instagram where you can see somebody that is like stronger than you, more jacked than you, leaner than you, whatever, right? And I think that we assume that these people are doing really well and that they're really happy. And I think as somebody who works in the industry, gosh, there's a lot of people that are on a lot of performance enhancing drugs that look really great, that perform really great, that are really unwell, unhappy people. Oh, and so to me, I read are you familiar with David Goggins?
Oh, no. And even if I was, I'm terrible with names.
Yeah. So he's this guy that the fitness community really loves, because he's like, I run until my toenails fall off. Like, I'm crazy.
Well, that's why I don't know who he is.
Yeah. So really intense fellow. I think he was like a Navy SEAL. Very intense. And he gets looked to as somebody who's really inspiring. And from a physical performance standpoint, he's done a lot of really crazy, impressive stuff. Yeah. But I read his book, and in his autobiography, he keeps like talking about ex-wives. And it's like, you get this sense of like, oh, this dude is horrible at relationship. Like, I don't know how many times he's really been married. Maybe he's a really nice guy, but
sure, it might be. I don't know.
The sense that like he's had a lot of relationships that have fallen apart, and it's like, again, I think that as an industry we glorify him for his performance, and like he's like, oh, he's inspiring. Like he's always telling us to get off our butts, and it's like, well, also this other part of his life is like completely unstructured, and so I think that circles back to how you were saying, like, okay, I've lost some weight, I've maintained some of it's ebbed and flowed, but I am the healthiest I've ever been. Like emotionally ever, right? And so I think that there are these internal immeasurable things or difficult to measure on the surface things that exercise has to offer, right, to our well-being, and that sometimes it takes a really conscious moment of emotionally detaching from what's advertised to us, like et cetera, I think, to really glean all of that mental and emotional benefit or freedom, you know?
Right. Okay. I think this is it. So thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. This has been so lovely, and I hope so informative. I guess last thing, drop your plug. Tell me your socials. Tell me where they can find you. If they're interested in coaching, tell me. Or just like you want a consultation. You just want to have some Annie time for yourself, you know? Like, I think that that would be.
You can find me on Instagram at Unbreakable Strength Co. And I'll send you the link. And then you can find me on my website at unbreakablestrengthco.com. So very, very, very straightforward, just Unbreakable Strength Co. And you can find all of my links. You can book a free consult, book a phone call, shoot me an email, shoot me a DM, and we'll get it taken care of.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks, Annie.
Yeah,
bye.
Thanks so much, dude.